The red emergency lights bathed the Terran Deep Space Monitoring Station in an eerie glow as Commander Yuki rushed through the corridors. His boots echoed against the metal floors while alarms blared overhead. Something big was happening, and he could feel it in his bones. "Commander, you need to see this right now," Lieutenant Hannah called out as Yuki burst into the main control room. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she worked the controls. The massive holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life, showing a transmission that had been intercepted just minutes ago, then cleared to reveal something that made Yuki's blood run cold. Alien voices, broken and desperate, speaking in fractured standard language that most species use for galactic communication. But these weren't the usual diplomatic messages or trade requests that crossed their screens daily. Double quotes, please, ... Anyone who receives this message, "We are the Kowari Federation," the voice cracked with emotion. "Our worlds are burning. Our children are dying. The Draketh Syndicate shows no mercy. They harvest our people like farmers harvest crops. We have nowhere left to run." Yuki moved closer to the display, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. If the transmission wasn't coming from one source, it was a combined signal from dozens of ships, all broadcasting the same desperate plea across the galaxy. "How long have they been sending this?" he asked, never taking his eyes off the screen. 3 weeks, sir," Hannah replied, pulling up additional data streams. "The signal has reached 17 different species so far. Every major civilization in this sector has received it." The holographic display shifted, showing tactical data that made Yuki's stomach turn. Planet after planet appeared on screen, once beautiful worlds that had housed billions of Kaleri people. Now, they were nothing but burning rocks floating in space. Orbital cities that had taken centuries to build were cracking apart like eggshells. Under relentless bombardment, "My God," whispered Sergeant Min from his position at the communications console. "Look at those refugee ships." The display zoomed in to show a heartbreaking sight. Thousands of ramshackle vessels fleeing through space, overloaded with survivors. These weren't military ships or even proper passenger vessels. They were cargo. Haulers, mining ships, personal craft. Anything that could fly and carry people away from the destruction. But even more terrifying were the ships pursuing them. Sleek black vessels that moved through space like hunting wolves. The Draketh hunter-killers were methodically tracking down every refugee ship, destroying some and capturing others for purposes that no one wanted to think about. "Sir, I've analyzed the tactical data," Lieutenant Hannah said, her voice steady despite the horror they were witnessing. "The Draketh aren't just conquering Kaleri space. They're completely erasing it. Every planet, every station, every ship. This isn't war, it's extinction." Yuki nodded grimly. He'd heard stories about the Draketh Syndicate from other sectors of the galaxy. They were unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced. Most alien species fought for territory, resources, or political power. The Draketh fought to consume. They didn't want to rule other species. They wanted to harvest them. "Have any of the 17 species responded to their plea?" Yuki asked. "None, sir," Hannah replied. The Centauri Council sent a formal diplomatic note expressing concern. Vegan Empire offered to host peace talks. The Altair Federation promised to file a complaint with the Galactic Ethics Committee. "In other words, nobody's going to help them," Sergeant Min said bitterly. "Why UK, I understood. Why?" The Draketh were too powerful, too dangerous. Most civilized species preferred to stay out of their way and hope they'd be left alone. It was easier to express sympathy than to risk becoming the next target. But as Yuki stared at the tactical display, he realized something that made his blood freeze. The Kaleri Federation wasn't just another random victim. They were the last major power standing between the Dracoth and the Outer Rim territories. Once they fell, there would be nothing stopping the Syndicate from expanding further, and the next. Logical target would be Earth. "Lieutenant Hannah, bring up the star charts," Yuki ordered. "Show me Draketh expansion patterns over the last 50 years." The display changed, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red dots marked Dracoth conquests, spreading outward like a cancer. The pattern was clear. They were systematically devouring everything in their path. moving toward the core worlds where humanity had built its civilization. They've consumed 43 different species in the last century, Hannah reported. Each time they follow the same pattern. Complete destruction of military forces, harvesting of population, strip mining of resources, then moving on to the next target. Oh. And now they're going after the Kalari, Yuki said quietly. The only force in this sector strong enough to slow them down. The transmission continued playing in the background, alien voices pleading for someone, anyone to help them survive. Children crying, adults begging, entire civilizations reduced to scattered refugees, hoping for mercy from a galaxy that had already written them off. Patch me through to Admiral Kyung immediately, Yuki ordered. Use the emergency command frequency. Sir, it's 3 a.m. on Luna Base, Sergeant Min pointed out. I don't care if he's having dinner with the president, Yuki snapped. This is a code black situation. The Dracoth just made this our war whether we wanted it or not. The transmission to Luna Base connected. Yuki took one last look at the tactical display. The aliens were begging for help, for refuge, for someone to save their survivors. They expected sanctuary. Maybe some medical aid or temporary shelter. They had no idea they'd just signed the Dracoth Syndicate's death warrant. The war room deep inside Luna Base had seen many critical moments in human history, but nothing quite like this. Admiral Kyung's boots echoed against the polished steel floor as he walked toward the massive circular table where Earth's most powerful military leaders had gathered. The emergency call had gone out just hours ago, and now 12 of humanity's top commanders sat in the dim blue light, waiting for answers. Lights full power, Kyung commanded. The room blazed to life, revealing the weathered faces of men and women who had fought in every major conflict humanity had seen. These were the people who had won the Mars Rebellion, crushed the Jupiter Mining Syndicate, and unified the solar system under one flag. General Minho was the first to speak. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as it focused on the Admiral. Dune, we got your emergency transmission. Something about alien refugees and a code black situation? It's worse than that, Kyung replied, moving to the center of the room where a massive holographic projector waited. Computer, activate Kalari transmission. Full display. The room filled with the desperate voices of dying aliens. The hologram showed burning worlds, refugee ships being hunted through space, the methodical destruction of an entire civilization. Some of the generals shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they watched children being separated from their families on overcrowded escape ships. Captain Sora leaned back in her chair, her scarred hands folded. She'd lost her left arm fighting pirates in the asteroid belt and had it replaced with military-grade cybernetics. These Kalari people, they're asking for help. Sanctuary, medical aid, the usual refugee assistance. Yes, Kyung nodded. That's not why we're here. He moved to the control panel and switched the display to show star charts. Red zones marked Dracoth territory, spreading like a virus across local space. The pattern was unmistakable. They were heading directly toward human space. Gentlemen, ladies, Kyung's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. This is not a rescue mission. This is an extermination order. The room erupted in voices. Some commanders demanded more information, others questioned the intelligence. But Admiral Day just sat quietly, studying the tactical display with calculating eyes. Explain, General Minho said simply. Kyung pulled up detailed intelligence reports. The Dracoth Syndicate has been expanding for 40 years. They don't conquer worlds, they consume them. Every living thing becomes resources for their war machine. Every planet becomes a mining operation. Every species becomes food or slave labor. The hologram showed footage from previous Dracoth conquests. Massive harvesting ships descended on populated worlds like mechanical locusts. Cities were stripped down to bare metal. Forests were reduced to processed biomass. Oceans were drained and converted to fuel. Intelligence shows they've harvested 43 species in the last century, Kyung continued. They don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners except as livestock. They consume everything in their path and move on to the next target. Admiral Day finally spoke up. She was known throughout the fleet as the Ice Queen, calm, calculating, and absolutely ruthless when the situation demanded it. What's the timeline? Best case scenario? If the Kalari Federation falls tomorrow, the Dracoth will consolidate their new territory for 6 months, then begin expanding again. Their next logical target would be the Centauri colonies. After that, the Outer Rim settlements. After that, Kyung paused. Earth. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Humanity had spent centuries building their civilization, spreading across dozens of star systems, creating a network of colonies and trade routes that spanned light years. The Dracoth would tear it all down and turn it into fuel for their expansion. Captain Sora pulled up the fleet manifests on her personal display. First Fleet is already mobilizing. Admiral Day has the 4th and 7th on standby. When do we move now? Kyung said without hesitation. His fingers danced across the control panel, entering authorization codes that most people in the room had never seen before. These were deployment codes that hadn't been used since the Unity Wars, when humanity had to fight for its very survival against the rebel colonies. Sir, General Minho interjected, if we're talking about a full military response, shouldn't we at least try diplomatic channels first? Maybe the Galactic Council could? The Galactic Council has been aware of Dracoth expansion for 50 years? Kyung cut him off. They've filed 17 formal complaints, held dozens of peace conferences, and issued countless diplomatic protests. Meanwhile, 43 entire species have been wiped out. Diplomacy doesn't work against predators. The holographic display shifted, showing human fleets beginning to move. Massive dreadnoughts powered up their fusion drives in orbital shipyards around Mars. Carrier groups bristling, with fighters began forming up near the Jupiter jump gates. But this wasn't the usual human military deployment. These ships were different, darker, more angular, equipped with weapons that most aliens had never seen. These were the vessels of the Deep Strike Force, humanity's most secret and deadly military units. Admiral Day stood up, her expression cold as space itself. What are our rules of engagement? Total war doctrine, Kyung replied. No Dracoth. Military vessel survives. No Dracoth command structure remains intact. No Dracoth supply line continues operating. We're not just stopping their expansion. We're ending their ability to threaten anyone ever again. The room buzzed with activity as commanders began coordinating with their fleets. But General Minho still looked troubled. Kyung, the Kalari Federation is expecting us to help them. They're asking for rescue, not for us to start a galactic war. And we will help them, Kyung said, his voice carrying a cold edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. But understand this. We're not going to save the Kalari Federation by evacuating their refugees or negotiating with their enemies. We're going to save them by making sure the Dracoth never threaten anyone again. The tactical display now showed the full scope of human military might. Hundreds of ships moving through space, coordinated like a pack of hunting wolves. Intelligence. Vessels were already infiltrating Dracoth space, mapping their defenses and identifying critical targets. Strike teams were preparing for deep insertion missions behind enemy lines. The Dracoth think they're apex predators, Kyung continued, watching the fleet movements with satisfaction. They've spent decades terrorizing civilizations that couldn't fight back. They're about to learn they've been hunting in someone else's territory. Captain Sora's cybernetic fingers clicked against the table as she studied the deployment schedules. How long do we estimate before first contact? 72 hours, Admiral Day replied. Long enough for them to think they're safe, not long enough for them to prepare for what's coming. As the War Council dispersed to coordinate the largest military operation in human history, Kyung remained in the room staring at the tactical display. The Kalari had begged for help, expecting sanctuary and medical aid. They were about to get something much more permanent. Warlord Fexta stretched his massive clawed arms and settled deeper into his command throne, a grotesque chair made from the bones of conquered enemies. His reptilian skin gleamed under the red lighting of the Dracoth flagship's bridge as he watched the main display with satisfaction. Another Kalari colony was burning beautifully, The orbital bombardment had been going on for 6 hours now, and the pathetic aliens had finally stopped their desperate attempts to fight back. Their defense platforms were nothing but floating debris. Their evacuation ships were being hunted down one by one, and their planetary shields had collapsed under the relentless assault of Dracoth plasma cannons. "Beautiful work," Vexta hissed. To his bridge crew, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the fear in the air. The Dracoth fed on terror as much as they fed on flesh, and this conquest was providing both in abundance. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Krikstar, approached the throne with the latest casualty reports. "My lord, the Kaleri fleet is completely scattered. The remaining ships are fleeing toward the outer system. Should we pursue? Let them run." Vexta laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Fear spreads faster than plasma fire. When word reaches their other colonies, they'll surrender without a fight. The Kaleri spirit is broken." On the main screen, massive harvesting ships descended toward the burning planet like mechanical vultures. These were the pride of the Dracoth fleet, kilometer-long vessels designed to strip entire worlds bare. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed, with organic components that could process any form of matter into useful resources. "Begin the harvest," Vexta commanded. "I want every useful life form processed and stored. The rest can be converted to biomass for the war effort." The bridge buzzed with activity as Dracoth officers coordinated the systematic destruction of another civilization. This was their specialty, not just conquest, but complete consumption. When they were finished, there would be nothing left of this world except a hollow shell floating in space. Vexta was contemplating which species to hunt next when his communications officer, a nervous creature with multiple eyes, approached hesitantly. "My lord," the officer hissed, "we're detecting unknown ships approaching the Nexer system." "More refugees?" Vexta yawned, not bothering to look away from the harvesting operation. "Destroy them. I don't want any witnesses escaping to spread stories." "No, my lord. These ships are ... different. They're not running away. They're heading directly toward us." This caught Vexta's attention. In 40 years of conquest, no species had ever voluntarily approached a Dracoth fleet. Every other race either fled in terror or cowered behind their defenses until they were crushed. "Show me," he commanded. The main display switched to show the approaching vessels. Vexta's eyes widened as he studied them. These weren't the organic, flowing designs that most galactic species favored. They were angular, metallic, built for pure function over form. They moved through space with a predatory grace that reminded him uncomfortably of Dracoth hunter-killers. "What species are they?" he demanded. "Unknown, my lord. They're broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Put it through." The screen flickered, and suddenly Vexta found himself staring at something he'd never seen before, a human face. The creature was smaller than a Dracoth, with pale skin marked by battle scars. But what struck Vexta most was the eyes. They were cold, calculating, absolutely without fear, when the human spoke. It was in perfect Dracoth language, which should have been impossible. "I am Admiral Day of the Terran Defense Force," the human said calmly. "You have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why your species should have stayed in whatever hole spawned you." For a moment, the bridge was completely silent. Then Vexta's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound so loud it made the metal walls vibrate. "Hairless mammals," he roared. "Did you hear that? These pathetic creatures think they can threaten us." His laughter was joined by the rest of the bridge crew, creating a chorus of cruel amusement. "My lord," Krikstar said between laughs, "should we respond to their ... ultimatum?" "Oh yes," Vexta grinned, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Send the third fleet. Show these mammals what real predators look like. Make it slow. I want them to have time to regret their arrogance before they die." The third fleet was the pride of Vexta Armada, 50 of the most advanced Dracoth warships ever built. Their bioorganic hulls could regenerate from damage. Their plasma weapons could melt through any known armor, and their psionic dampeners could drive enemy crews insane with fear. The sleek, Living ships moved forward like a school of predatory fish, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that had terrorized 100 worlds. They expected the humans to flee, as every other species had done when faced with Dracoth might. Instead, something happened that had never occurred in the entire history of Dracoth expansion. The human ships accelerated directly into the Dracoth. Formation? What are they doing? Ezexa snarled, leaning forward in his throne. Are they insane, my lord? They're not retreating, his tactical officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. They single quotes, targing us. Impossible. No species is that stupid. But the humans kept coming, their angular ships cutting through space with deadly precision. As they closed the distance, Vexa could see weapon ports opening along their hulls. Not the organic plasma conduits the Dracoth used, but mechanical launchers that bristled with menace. What are they? Vexta S. Words died as the first human salvo lit up space. It wasn't plasma or energy weapons, it was something else entirely. Solid projectiles moving at impossible speeds, launched from electromagnetic railguns that could accelerate metal slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy was devastating. The first Dracoth ship simply disintegrated. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and debris. The bioorganic hull that could regenerate from energy weapons couldn't handle the sheer physical force of hypervelocity projectiles. Shields. Vexta screamed, but the human weapons ignored their energy defenses entirely. The railgun slugs passed through defensive barriers like they weren't even there. Punching through armor plating that had never been breached, ship after ship exploded in brilliant fireballs. The Dracoth vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were being torn apart like tissue paper. Their advanced technology, their superior firepower, their psionic abilities, none of it mattered against weapons that simply hit too hard and too fast to stop. Return fire, Crickstar shouted, but the human ships were already moving, their formations shifting and adapting faster than Dracoth targeting systems could track. When the Dracoth plasma beams finally lanced out, they struck empty space. The battle lasted exactly 12 minutes. When it was over, the Third Fleet was gone. Not retreating, not damaged, completely gone. 50 of the most powerful warships in the Dracoth Armada had been reduced to floating wreckage. In the sudden silence, Admiral Day's voice cut through the static on the communications channel. Warlord Vexta, she said calmly, as if she was discussing the weather. Your 30 seconds are up. Vexa stared at the tactical display in shock. In all his years of conquest, nothing like this had ever happened. The Dracoth were supposed to be the apex predators of the galaxy. They were supposed to be the ones who struck fear into other species. For the first time in his life, Warlord Vexta felt something he'd never experienced before. Terror. The ancient Dracoth, fortress world of Grimhall, had stood unconquered for 3,000 years. Its massive stone halls had echoed with the victory roars of countless warlords who had crushed entire civilizations. Now those same halls trembled with panic as Supreme Warlord Grickstar called an emergency session of the High Command. The circular war chamber was chaos. Holographic displays flickered constantly as new reports flooded in from across the Empire. Red warning lights bathed the assembled warlords in blood-colored shadows as they tried to make sense of what was happening to their supposedly invincible domain. Report. Grickstar's voice boomed through the chamber. Its massive form towered. Over the other Dracoth leaders, scars from 100 battles marking his armored hide. He had ruled the Syndicate for 40 years, expanding their territory further than any previous Supreme Warlord. My lord, his intelligence chief stammered. We have confirmed attacks in 17 systems simultaneously. At border raids. Deep strikes into the heart of our territory. At a domain display showed a three-dimensional map of Dracoth space. Red markers indicated human attacks, appearing like a virus spreading through their empire. What made it worse was that these weren't random strikes. They were coordinated. Precise, targeting exactly the right locations to cause maximum damage. How are they moving so fast? Grickstar demanded, his claws digging gouges in the stone. Table, Our scouts show no jump signatures, no warp distortions. They're appearing out of nowhere. Warlord Dekvar, commander of the border fleets, leaned forward. My lord, I've lost contact with 5 entire battle groups. They were patrolling normal routes, then simply ... gone. No distress signals, no wreckage, nothing. Impossible. Another. Warlord snarled. Draketh ships don't just disappear. The display flickered, and General Yuna's image appeared from the front lines. Her face was streaked with burns, and explosions could be seen in the background behind her. Her command ship was clearly under attack, my lord, she reported between the sounds of battle. I can confirm the humans are using technology we've never encountered. Their ships don't use jump gates or conventional warp drives. They fold space differently. No predictable patterns, no choke points we can defend against. What do you mean fold space? Grikstar growled. They're not traveling through space. My lord, they're bending it. One moment our sensors detect nothing. The next moment they're right on top of us, weapons already firing. It's like they can appear anywhere at will. Another explosion rocked Yuna's ship and her image flickered. My lord, I have to go. They're targeting the bridge. The transmission cut to static. The war chamber fell silent except for the constant stream of emergency reports flooding in. Supply depot, Vorthok 7 had been destroyed. The breeding colonies in the Nexus sector were under attack. 3 command carriers had been ambushed and destroyed while carrying vital intelligence. My lord, the intelligence chief said quietly. There's something else. The humans aren't fighting like other species. What do you mean? Most civilized races target military assets while avoiding civilian populations. They follow galactic warfare conventions. The humans. He paused, checking his reports. They're targeting everything that keeps our war machine running. The display changed to show a comprehensive analysis of human attacks. Orbital factories that produced weapons and ships destroyed. Mining operations that extracted raw materials gone. Fuel refineries burning. Transportation hubs obliterated. But worse than that, they were targeting the breeding worlds where young Draketh were raised and trained for war. Not to kill the civilians, but to evacuate them to uninhabitable worlds where they couldn't contribute to the war effort. They're dismantling our entire civilization, Warlord Kethron whispered over the communication channel. His territory was on the far side of the Empire, supposedly safe from attack. They fight like they want to erase us completely. He was right, and the truth of it sent chills through the assembled warlords. This wasn't a territorial war or a dispute over resources. This was systematic destruction designed to eliminate the Draketh as a threat forever in the Vorthok system. Captain Chow led her squadron of human destroyers through a cloud of debris that had once been a Draketh supply convoy. Her ships moved, with deadly precision hunting down the few vessels that had tried to escape. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, her tactical officer reported. Draketh colony ship, engines damaged, attempting to reach the jump point. Choss studied the tactical display. The ship was packed with Draketh civilians, not military personnel, but ordinary citizens who had been evacuating from a nearby world. Under normal rules of warfare, they would be considered non-combatants. But these weren't normal rules of warfare. Target their engines, she commanded coldly. Disable, don't destroy. I want them drifting. Ma'am, they're broadcasting surrender signals. Irrelevant. Orders are clear. No Draketh military vessel leaves the system operational. No exceptions. The railgun slugs lanced out with surgical precision, tearing through the colony ship's engine section. The massive vessel shuddered to a halt, power failing, life support switching to emergency backup. They would survive, but they weren't going anywhere. Let them drift, Cha said. Let them think about what they've done to 43 other species. This was happening across Dracoth's space. Now human fleets had spread through their territory like a plague, methodically dismantling an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. They didn't conquer worlds, they simply made them useless for military purposes. Back in the war chamber, Supreme Warlord Grikstar was receiving reports that grew worse by the hour. The humans seemed to know exactly where every important facility was located, exactly which ships carried vital supplies, exactly where command personnel would be at any given time. They have intelligence on us that's impossible, his security chief reported. They're hitting targets that aren't even on our main strategic databases. Somehow they know more about our empire than we do. My lord, another warlord interrupted. We're receiving reports from the Outer Rim. The humans have destroyed 17 fuel depots in the last hour. Our fleets won't be able to maintain long-range operations much longer. Grickstar slammed his fist on the table, cracking the ancient. Stone. How many ships do they have? How big is their fleet? That's the problem, my lord. You don't know. They never mass their forces where we can count them. They appear, strike, and vanish. Oh. Our best estimate is somewhere between 300 and 3,000 vessels. That's a useless estimate. I know, my lord, but they don't fight like any enemy we've ever faced. They don't hold territory. They don't establish bases. They don't follow any recognizable strategy. They just ... destroy things. The intelligence chief pulled up another display. My lord, in the last 12 hours, we've lost 60% of our manufacturing capacity, 80% of our fuel production, and 90% of our long-range communication networks. Even if we could organize a counterattack, we don't have the resources to sustain it. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Warlord Grickstar felt something that no Dracoth leader had experienced in living memory. Helplessness. The humans weren't just winning this war. They were ending the Dracoth's ability to fight any war ever again. And they were doing it with a cold, methodical efficiency that was more terrifying than any battle roar or threat of violence. The Dracoth had spent centuries believing they were the apex predators of the galaxy. They were about to learn they'd been wrong. The ancient capital city of Grimhall looked nothing like the mighty fortress it had been just 3 months ago, where towering spires had once reached toward the sky. Only broken concrete and twisted metal remained. The great palace where Supreme Warlord Grickstar had ruled over a galactic empire was now a crater filled with rubble and ash. Warlord Vexta knelt in the ruins, his hands bound behind his back with restraints that hummed with electromagnetic energy. His once mighty armor was cracked and scorched, his proud warrior's mane was singed and dirty, his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen his entire world collapse. Around him, hundreds of other Dracoth officers and leaders knelt. In similar positions, these were the survivors, the ones who had surrendered when it became clear that resistance was impossible. Many others had chosen to fight to the death rather than face the humiliation of defeat. Admiral Kyung walked slowly through the ruins, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. His uniform was spotless, his bearing calm and professional. He looked like a man who had just completed a routine training exercise, not someone who had just orchestrated the destruction of a galactic empire. Behind him walked Commanders June and Nari, both carrying data tablets that contained the final tallies of the war. The numbers were staggering. In 3 months, humanity had completely dismantled a civilization that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Final report, Kyung said quietly. Yes, sir, Commander June replied, consulting his tablet. At Akuth, military forces 100% neutralized. It's not destroyed, but completely unable to operate. All command vessels have been captured or disabled. All supply networks have been severed. All manufacturing facilities have been shut down. Civilian casualties? Kyung asked. Minimal, sir. As ordered, we focused on infrastructure and military targets. Dracoth civilian populations have been relocated to reservation worlds, where they can rebuild their society without the ability to threaten others. It was true. The human forces had been ruthlessly efficient, but they hadn't engaged in the kind of wholesale slaughter that the Dracoth themselves had practiced. Instead, they had simply removed the Syndicate's ability to wage war on anyone ever again. Behind the human commanders, a group of Kolari refugees watched the proceedings in stunned silence. These were the survivors of the species that had sent out the desperate plea for help that started this entire conflict. They had expected to be rescued, perhaps given temporary shelter while they rebuilt their shattered civilization. They had never imagined witnessing the complete destruction of their enemies. Prime Minister Zialara approached Admiral Kuhn hesitantly. She was a graceful creature with silver skin and large expressive eyes that reflected the trauma of everything her people had endured. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death. "Admiral Kyung," she said, we don't know how to thank you. When we sent that transmission, we were hoping someone would offer us sanctuary, perhaps medical aid for our wounded. We never imagined ... double quotes that we'd end the war permanently." Kung's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of deep conviction. "Prime Minister, the Dracoth don't negotiate, they don't change, they don't learn. From their mistakes, they consume everything in their path and move on to the next target. The only way to stop a predator like that is to remove it from the equation entirely." Zilera looked around at the devastation, trying to process what she was seeing. But this ... this isn't just victory. This is the complete elimination of their ability to threaten anyone. "Exactly," Commander Nari said. "We studied their expansion patterns for the last century. Every time another species tried to negotiate with them, the Dracoth simply used the peace talks to prepare for their next attack. Every time someone showed mercy, the Dracoth interpreted it as weakness." "Understand total force." As they spoke, reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The word was spreading fast. Humanity had just demonstrated a level of military capability that no one had imagined possible. More importantly, they had shown that they were willing to use that capability to completely eliminate threats to galactic peace, the hegemony of claws, a militaristic empire that had been planning to invade the outer colonies, quietly canceled their operation and recalled their fleets to defensive positions. The Shadow Fleet, a group of pirates and raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes for decades, simply disappeared into deep space, hoping to avoid human attention. Most surprisingly, the Hive Collective, a mysterious alien intelligence that had refused all contact with other species for over 50 years, sent diplomatic overtures to Earth for the first time in decades. The message was simple. They wanted to establish formal, peaceful relations with humanity. Similar messages were arriving from species across the galaxy. The message was clear. Humanity had just proven that they didn't fight wars to win territory or resources or political advantage. They fought wars to end them permanently. Captain Chase stood on the bridge of her destroyer, watching the final phase of the operation. Human engineering teams were working around the clock to ensure that former Dracoth territories could be safely handed over to their original inhabitants, or to species that could manage them peacefully. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 minor pirate fleets. They're offering to disarm completely in exchange for safe passage to neutral space." Cha smiled grimly. "Grant their requests. Make sure they understand that this is a one-time offer. If we see them engaging in hostile activities again, there won't be a second chance." As the human fleets began their journey home, leaving behind a galaxy that was suddenly, strangely peaceful, the true scope of what had happened became clear. For the first time in recorded history, the major threats to galactic stability had been eliminated not through negotiation or containment, but through the simple expedient of making it impossible for them to continue their aggressive behavior. On the former Dracoth worlds, Kaleri children were already playing in the ruins of military fortresses that had once housed the weapons used to destroy their homes. They laughed and ran through corridors where Dracoth officers had once planned the conquest of entire star systems. These children would grow up in a universe where the monsters in the dark had been permanently switched off. They would never know the fear that their parents had lived with, the constant worry that predatory species might descend from the stars to destroy everything they had built. Prime Minister Zialara watched the children play, turned to Admiral Kyun one last time. "We begged for help," she said quietly. "We expected rescue. Instead, you gave us something we never dared to hope for." "What's that?" Young asked. "A future where our children will never have to send desperate pleas for help into the darkness." Kyung nodded slowly. "That was always the plan, Prime Minister. Humanity learned long ago that the only way to ensure lasting peace is to make war impossible for those who would abuse it." As the last human ships disappeared into jump space, heading back to Earth, the galaxy settled into a new era. The Kaleri had begged for help, and humanity had answered with total war. But in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it hadn't seen in centuries: true peace, for the first time in galactic history. Civilizations could build and explore, and grow without looking over their shoulders for the next predator to emerge from the darkness. The monsters were gone. Not just defeated, but permanently removed from the equation, and in the quiet that followed, the galaxy finally had a chance to heal the end.